Welcome to the Grazing Grass Podcast, episode 118.
Get involved with some local farmers that are doing it, or find someone, even if you have to drive an hour or two, bounce ideas off of guys that have been doing it.
You're listening to the Grazing Grass Podcast, sharing information and stories of grass-based livestock production utilizing regenerative practices. I'm your host, Cal Hardage. You're growing more than grass. You're growing a healthier ecosystem to help your cattle thrive in their environment. You're growing your livelihood by increasing your carrying capacity and reducing your operating costs. You're growing stronger communities and a legacy to last generations. The grazing management decisions you make today impact everything from the soil beneath your feet to the community all around you. That's why the Noble Research Institute created their Essentials of Regenerative Grazing course to teach ranchers like you easy-to-follow techniques to quickly assess your forage production and infrastructure capacity in order to begin grazing more efficiently. Together, they can help you grow not only a healthier operation, but a legacy that lasts. Learn more on their website at noble.org/grazing. It's noble.org/grazing. On today's show, we have Kody Karr of Karr Family Farms. Kody is 9th generation in Monroe City, Missouri. He has operation including mixed grass and crop farm that's integrating cattle and sheep into the cropping rotations while converting crop ground back into native pasture. It's a really good episode. We talk about his journey, a little bit about his cows, a lot about his sheep, and native pastures. It's a really good episode. I think you'll enjoy it. First, let's jump in 10 seconds about my farm. And for it, we have decided not to bale any hay this year, which is always great. Dad and I have discussed it for years. We did go 1 year without baling any hay, but a little bit of stress finding hay and getting it here, so we went back to baling hay. Earlier this year, Dad was willing to buy hay if he could get it for the right price, so we've stayed off our hay meadows, but we've been watching hay price and trying to decide what to do. And Dad just talked to the custom baler just a couple days ago, and we're able to get it in our barns cheaper than what we thought. So we are not baling any hay, which is great news for the hay meadows because they get abused because we take that hay off and then we feed it other places. So I get to graze it now. So actually I have more grass to graze than I anticipated. Obviously, if I'd been holding off of it thinking we were going to hay it, it's much more mature than I'd like for it to be. But that's a problem I'd rather have than not having it to graze. So we'll see how that goes. I'm excited that it gives me more grazing days and maybe I can manage it a little bit better and get us further into the year. Enough about my farm. Let's talk to Kody. Kody, we want to welcome you to the Grazing Grass Podcast. We're excited you're here today.
Thank you, Cal. I appreciate you having me on. I've listened for quite a while and I'm pretty excited for the opportunity.
Wonderful. Kody, to get started, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your operation?
Yeah, I live up in northeast Missouri. Monroe City is the town's name. We're about an hour and 15 minutes north of St. Louis, so the outskirts of St. Louis, 20 minutes west of Hannibal, and 36 if you know where that's at. I am a 9th generation agrarian in northeast Missouri, a 5th generation on the farm ground we're still on. My mom, my grandpa, and myself own about 550 acres of mix between row crop and pasture. We've been converting more to pasture the last couple of years. Yeah, so I moved home in 2021 after my dad passed away. So that was really, I'd been involved in the farm for quite a few years, but really opened the door after he was gone. Mom didn't want to run the whole thing, so I came back and on about half the ground, started taking it over.
Now, Kody, prior to coming back in 2021, did you grow up thinking, hey, this farming is great. This is what I want to do? Or what were your thoughts as a kid about this?
I always liked being outside and playing on the farm. I probably wasn't the most excited about doing the farm work at all times. I enjoyed cattle. I don't love sitting in tractors. I do some row cropping. That I live in row crop country, so it's just a reality for us. But the livestock and the grasslands were always my favorite. So at the time, I was looking to get away and do something else because I didn't want to have to sit in a tractor. And then, full circle, I spent a lot of time in machinery, but I get to sneak out and play in the pastures quite a bit too. It's pretty fun.
And I have to concur. The livestock was always my favorite. Haying season was the only time in my life that I'm happy I have asthma and allergies.
That's a good out.
Yeah, and it got me out of a lot on haying season. In fact, it caused my parents to get a cab tractor, which took some of my excuses away. But we just had a family get together for Mother's Day. And my brother was still complaining about how I didn't help as much in the hay pasture. And here we are a few decades later.
Yeah, I've got a younger brother, and there's always comparison. There's 11 years between us.
Oh, yeah.
We're always comparing how the two of us were raised because there's quite a few differences.
Yeah, and completely on a tangent. We have a sister. So my brother is 22 months younger than me, so 2 years. Almost 2 years. We have a sister that's 7 years younger than us. So she's the baby and the only girl in the family. So we feel like we really were mistreated. Now, Dad gets tired of hearing that, and he's, oh, you guys weren't mistreated. We weren't, but it's fun to complain about it.
Oh, yeah. Yep. Gets everybody stirred up at family events, I'm sure.
Oh, yeah. I pride myself on being able to make my brother and sister mad in half a second. Anyway, enough of that tangent. Kody, did you go away to college?
I did, yeah. I graduated high school in 2012, went to the University of Missouri, studied plant sciences. I got to school, and I've got a couple friends I got hooked up with and realized I wasn't the only weird kid that really liked grass. So that probably started the addiction for me. A couple of buddies and myself, we got into native grasses and talking about how to work within our ecosystem better, ecological context for our area. We would have historically been oak savanna, tall grass prairie, obviously a lot of row crop now, but I'm always interested in doing like habitat restoration and that kind of stuff and tying into livestock to that. College opened some doors in that area, or I guess helped me grow my network with some friends. But I spent some time down there. My wife, she's from my hometown. We got married while we were in college, and both of us graduated in 2016 and decided to move back home to the farm. Her family they had a commercial hog operation, and she came back home to work on that, and I started working at a local co-op up here and just helping on the side on the family farm. I rented about 40 acres from my family at that time for pasture, but that was our foot in the door getting back home.
Yeah. Then in 2021, you really started helping a lot more there. Tell us what you're doing on your farm.
Yeah, so we're a mixed operation. Like my wife and myself, she runs the hog side of it. I don't have anything to do with that. She's great at that. I run our livestock, grass-based livestock, and row crop. We farm a little over 500 acres of row crop, about just a hair less than 300 acres of grass ground. We have 230 ewes that we run on cover crops and some perennial pastures, 20 head of cows of our own. We run anywhere between 40 and 80 contract cows on a given year, depending on the grass. But yeah, that's what we do on that end of the operation.
When you went back in 2021, were cows and sheep already on the operation, or were they an addition after that?
My mom and dad had about 100 head of cow-calf pairs. That's gotten whittled down. I'm not counting those into it. My mom still has 210 acres she lives on. She runs a herd of cattle. We culled back quite a bit on the amount of cows we had for her, just easier for mom. She's put in a water system on her farm and quite a bit of infrastructure, so she's dialed back to about 50 head of cows, letting grass recover, and as the system's coming online, she'll probably continue to grow it from there. But we always had livestock. Like I said, we were bounced anywhere between 90 and 110 head. They're pairs of cows. A big part of our operation for quite a few years.
What brought you to adding sheep to your operation?
So my wife, she grew up showing sheep. I always said we wouldn't have any, and at one point in time, she thought we needed 5 for the kids. They were smaller, easier to work with, and she talked me into getting sheep, and I probably annoyed her ever since then because I became obsessed with them because they really fit our operation well. So I took it and completely ran off the deep end with it. So we had about 340 head last year before a drought hit. We cut back a little bit as we're bringing pastures back online from converting crop ground. But yeah, she's the one that got me to drink the Kool-Aid on the sheep, whether she wants to admit it or not. And yeah, they're probably my favorite animal to deal with now. But
there's that joke always about chicken math. 1 + 1 = 10 or something. So it sounds like sheep math got you all. So
yeah, it goes from like 5 to 50 to 300, and it just keeps, it doesn't stop for some reason.
Yeah. So when we think about your livestock, we're talking your cattle and your sheep. How do you manage those?
So we've got a rotational grazing system. We've been putting paddocks in. When I started out with my cows on that first 40 acres, I had somewhere around 18 or 19 different paddocks. The sheep, currently, I run them inside of net fencing. A lot of times I'm on crop ground with no perimeter bin, which sometimes is good experience, and other I can tell you some horror stories on that. Thankfully, they normally stay off the neighbors and just eat my crops. But yeah, so I give them anywhere, depending on the grass supply, a ½ acre to 1.25 acres a day as far as that flock goes, and sometimes multiple moves, hoping to eventually get the infrastructure in on the place I live on to where I've got 5-acre paddocks and I can subdivide from there. But we try to move them every day to 2 to 3 days. This time of year with my day job and being in the field, some of the farms I rent, we dial back where we're probably moving weekly on cattle. I'd like to be better about it, but it's just a time issue on getting to them. We had direct marketed some meat the last couple of years into St. Louis, so we are grass fed and grass managed as far as that goes. I stepped out of that this year just for the row crop side, and workload at my day job has picked up a little bit, so we dialed back as far as going down to the city every weekend to a farmer's market, but I'm still doing some online sales.
One thing that immediately jumps out to me is your rotational or your durational on a paddock. You're moving them a little slower than a lot of people talk about, and you've got to do those daily moves, or you got to move them closer or more often. I think you bring up an excellent point. You're working off the farm, so you have to move them in relationship to that off the job or off the farm job, because we can complain about those, but they pay a lot of bills.
Yep, they do. When you pay down some debt and let the livestock just take care of themselves, you can make a lot of headway. So
yeah,
I first year back from after my dad passed, I worked myself into the ground trying to keep up on those daily moves and everything. And just had to have a little reevaluation about we're going to give up a little bit on the grazing just to be more effective with our time rather than a grazing efficiency thing. I'm hoping to get back to that someday, but we're not there yet. The infrastructure's got to be there first. But yeah.
And 2 things you touched on there, or 2 things I'm going to expand on just a little bit. Your physical and mental health is so important, because when we talk about farms, we talk about farms being profitable so they can be sustainable. The other side of that is if you're wearing down yourself because you're burning the candle at both ends, it's not going to be sustainable long-term for your body, for your mental health. So you've got to do what works for you. And the reason I'm harping on this just a little bit, I feel like we're all the time saying do daily moves, but really, what is your context and what are you doing? You don't have to go crazy and just work yourself raw just doing daily moves. There's other ways to manage, and you don't want to leave them there too long, so you're doing rotational overgrazing, but at the end of the day, a little bit of rotational overgrazing is better than overgrazing a whole place.
Absolutely. Yeah, we're still seeing a lot of the benefits we were when we were moving them every day. But yeah, like if you have the time to move them daily, I won't argue with anyone on that. But, yep.
Yep. Now, you talked about you would love to get down to where you've got 5-acre pastures and then subdivide them as you move them. I assume that's a long-term plan, and as you work towards it, how are you putting those in and planning those?
Yeah, so we've converted some ground out of row crop that doesn't have any perimeter fences around it, or it's a proportion of a larger row crop field, so there's a perimeter around the whole farm, but trying to break it up. So we're adding hide pintle in. We've been playing around with some of the timeless fence posts, not to give them a plug or anything. It's just that seems to work well with the sheep. We've been running some 3 to 5 strand hide pencils, testing to see what we can keep them in with. Inside of a place, we're getting down to three strands. I've got a couple spots out in the middle where there's no fence for a mile and a half, 2 miles, where we've got some 5-strand stuff just to make sure it's a little more beefed up. And that's actually where my sheep are currently sitting on a piece I'm going to plant to corn, hopefully when it stops raining here. I don't want to say that out loud because we went through a drought last year, but But yeah, that's what we've been doing. Weekends or wintertime, I do a lot of fence work when we're not in the field or not as busy at work at the co-op. But yeah,
Now, one thing you mentioned there, so you can get them down to about 3 strands, and you've got them in this piece that's a little bit further, and you've built a little beefier fence there, 5 strands. Are you keeping your cattle in the same area, or are you managing those as 2 separate
I haven't
herds, flocks?
currently. So on the farm I live on, there's a 150-acre farm that I live on. It's actually I have 10 acres in city limits of Monroe City, and then there's 140 acres outside of city limits. The sheep and the cows work together on that farm. We have another 190 acres down the road that has been row crops, and these sheep are the first livestock on that farm since the 1970s. They used to bring hogs over to it. This is the first year we've had livestock back on it. So I haven't brought cows over. My grandpa's still a little skeptical on the whole. There's a row crop farm, there's a livestock farm. They can't be both, even though he grew up on the duo farm. But he's coming around to the idea. I think that 5 strands beefed up enough, I would be pretty comfortable running cattle in it, especially as long as it's hot and there's floors in front of them. But yeah, to this point, we haven't taken any cattle over there with it. I think I finished building that fence right around the last winter. It's relatively new, but
As you're building these fences and stuff, what are you doing for water?
I haul. That's another reason we take sheep on a lot of farms. We don't have the cattle. I've got some old hay wagons that we've got tanks on, so I can haul the wagon out to the field. Sheep obviously have a lot lower water requirements, so while we're converting some of these row crop pieces or fencing off these row crop pieces, it's a lot easier on me by having the lower water need by the sheep. If I was trying to keep water in front of cows this time of year with temperatures picking up, I'd be chasing them constantly. Some of the other farms, we had put some wells in, trying to run pipeline to where we got access points from the row crop down for the livestock while we're grazing cover crops. But yeah, that long term, we'd hope to have a well or a pond or some kind of a water source that we can pump from. But
right, but having portable water there for sheep, like you mentioned, so much easier than if you were doing it for your cattle. And that's a great way to get started on a place. If you don't have a good water source, you can bring water to sheep. And you mentioned right now about 230 ewes.
Yeah.
How much water are you having to take water every day? Or you have a big enough tank? It's once a week?
Yeah, I think last summer I had a big tank in front of them. I'm trying to think. So I was grazing some sorghum, Sudan, sun hemp, and sunflower behind some wheat on one farm. I want to say I filled it up every 2 to 3 weeks, and we actually had 340 ewes in that group. Before we with the drought last year, we cooled down a little bit just to make sure we had plenty of winter feed. It was probably every 2 weeks that I was feeding them, and it was drought conditions. It was 95 degrees. They had shade. It was a rougher farm, a rolling farm, so there was some tree cover, so they weren't out in the sun all day. But 1,000-gallon tank over I want to say a 2-week period is what we were getting at. So it was pretty pleasant to fill up and drag around. It was just kind of drug it from one paddock to the next. I think we were doing 4 or 5 day moves on that particular farm just because it didn't have any infrastructure. Yeah, the sheep really fit some of those farms that don't have infrastructure well, because as long as you can keep them in a fence or build enough of a temporary fence to keep them in, you can get livestock impact on places that most people wouldn't let you bring cows to. They seem to feel a little more comfortable with sheep being out there, is what I've noticed from some of my landlords.
Go on that topic just a little bit more on a musing I have that I keep thinking how to figure this out. I see everyone around here's got cattle. And I look at those pastures, I'm like, sheep could get some benefit out there and could help them with some weed control and stuff. And I've tried to think how I could structure a lease just for sheep grazing on those places. Of course, you got to be very aware and convince the landowner, the cattle person, that you're not taking forage away from their cattle. So I haven't figured that out. If anyone out there in listener land knows or is doing that, I'd love to hear more.
You might talk Greg Christensen up. He's out by Lacine, Kansas. I don't remember the exact town. My brother-in-law used to live out there. He's Grandview Livestock on YouTube. He does.
I watch his channel sometimes.
He does some of that he takes some sheep on some farms that other people are running cattle on to clean up sheep. He may have goats as well, but he'd be one to talk to about that.
I think I've seen on him, or I've seen the goats portion of it. And goats, I think, is a little bit easier argument, because goats can go into brush and change the looks of that when cattle are not getting into the brush. So, yeah, but that's interesting. I'll have to look. I know I watch him on YouTube sometimes.
Yep. Yeah.
Yeah. let's talk a little bit more about your sheep. We're in the middle of lambing right now, so it's on top of my mind, sheep,
Yep.
and trying to figure out more about it. How or when do you lamb them, and how do you manage during lambing? Because for me, that's always an issue. Now, I'm trying to do daily moves. I've slacked off of that more during lambing. And in full transparency, I don't do daily moves with my sheep all the time. But when I move them up close to the house for lambing, I start tightening a rotation up and moving them more often. I have to be careful about lambs bonding with their moms.
Yep, that's one thing I was going to say. I've struggled with a little bit this spring. Just like I said, but coming out of a drought, I've been trying to rest some of our perennial pastures. So I took them out to some rye that doesn't have any fence around it. Started lambing on the rye and moving the sheep daily to every 2 days, depending on the paddock size. I've had some bonding issues. I would partially talking about those 5 acre paddocks in the future, as far as wanting to do that, I'd like to be able to do more of a drift lambing system to where every 2 or 3 days you bring them up from the rear so they really have time to bond with their mom. I'm not there yet. I was just talking to some other guys that are doing more of a system like that, and then get back whenever you're through lambing, get back into that tighter rotation as far as parasite management and grass management goes. But yeah, so I'm lambing. I'm right in the middle of lambing myself right now. I just moved them into a 24 acre piece it was stockpiled summer annuals last year. Got some volunteer wheat and stuff coming up. Just for that reason, let the sheep dampen down, have a chance to rebond with their moms. I'm hoping to keep them in there for a week or two before I take them back home to some other cover crop ground. But that is one, I've always moved them pretty frequently with lambing. I think that's one change I'm going to make after the last 2 to 3 years. I've had a few more bottle lambs than I think I should be having.
I've been there.
Bottle lambs are cute, but
they are so much work.
They're high maintenance.
Yeah. They're cute for the first 12 hours.
Yep. And then I've got some in my yard, and anytime I crack the door, they come running because they think it's time to feed. Yep. But
been there. Completely agree. Now, with your lambing, are you doing any tagging or working of your lambs, or when do you do any type of work with them?
I don't currently. It's the same reason I try to keep my hands off as much as possible through this window. Sure, if I was running a purebred operation, I couldn't do what I do. We're just a commercial flock. But no, I try to be as hands off as much as possible. You get closer into that August window, I'll start peeling off some of the bigger ram lambs and probably do it August, September. We start weaning all the ram lambs off. We don't docktail. We don't castrate. I'm pretty lazy sheep farmer. I say if I can find a low maintenance way to do stuff, I'm all about it. So
I want to help you out there, Kody. You're efficient farmer.
Yes. Yeah.
Because efficiency is laziness with good PR.
That is true.
Yeah.
Yep. I'll roll with that next time someone asks me.
Right. You're an efficient farmer. And I do the same thing. Granted, if I was running registered animals, I'd have to do something different, but very low maintenance, hands off. Except one thing I have, or one issue I have, I try and raise my own rams.
Yep.
And then I want to be careful because I want rams that are twins or triplets and not singles. Yep. And when you're weaning them later, the nicest looking rams are singles.
Yeah. And that is one I should have said. I do try to mark. It's like the first 15, 20 ewes that lamb. I try to mark some of if they have twins and twin rams, I do try to mark those. I know I've actually got a group, like the first 15 ewes that lamb this year, I've got separated off just before I hauled all my sheep over to this other farm. They'd already had lambs, so I've got them partially separated. So before I regroup everybody back up, I will probably put some tags in those just so I know to pick rams out of that group. Just some of the mob breeding principles, just you want to have early maturing ewes, early maturing rams. And
yeah. I really like that idea, and I hadn't even thought about it. I had thought this year I might ear notch some.
Yep.
But like I've mentioned on the podcast, I'm really quick. I can catch them if they're just born. But if they're over like 15 minutes of age, actually it's a little bit more. I can go probably a couple hours. I can't catch them. So
they're nimble.
And then you don't want to interrupt that bonding period. So I had thought I'd get them in at 24, 48 hours and ear notch some. And I'll be honest, the efficiency of myself got ahead of me, and I didn't get that done. So I've thought about going out there and some ewes that I know are older, that's been in the flock a long time, I'd mark some of those. But I really like your idea of taking those first few that's lambed and marking those so you can pick from them, because like you said, you want to pick from the early maturing ones, the ones that are lambing early in the cycle.
Yep. Yeah. So there's definitely some higher fertility going on there. Something. Yeah.
Talking about your sheep, what breeds are you working with?
So yeah, we're a little bit heavier on easy cares, which are Katahdin, Dorper, and Romanovs. They're a little bit woolier than I like, but they're supposed to be a higher fertility breed. The other ones we run are hopping composite, which they would have came not too far from where you're at, Cal.
From Warner.
Okay, yeah. So those
Warner or Wagner. Either way, it's not very far.
Yeah, down in Oklahoma. And those they're harder to find. I've got a couple contacts that I've got through to Jeremiah Markwade, one, but he's raised them for years now. And when I first got back into sheep, I went down and visited him, and they're a really nice flock. So I've been pretty pleased with the hopping composites. That's the range we run are all hopping. But
I've seen photos of them. I haven't seen them in person, but I've heard good things about them. I've also heard about the easy care sheep, and enough I've looked into it, but I can't find any relatively close to me.
Yeah, the thing, like, there's Nebraska and Iowa. I had to go north to find most of those. Where the hoppings I could go to southern Missouri and find. So I'm in the middle of both of them. So I guess it worked out okay. So yeah, but the easy cares have done pretty decent. I was curious how they'd handle the heat with the wool, but they seem like they've done pretty decent this summer. As hot as last year was, I was pretty pleased with the way they performed.
Oh yeah, and do they? So they don't shed completely, but do they shed enough that it's okay, or are they carrying full wool?
I don't know what breed to compare them to. Their bellies flick off pretty decent, and like halfway up their back, it seems like the wool starts there and goes out. If someone wanted to shear them, I'm sure that would probably benefit them, but they seem like they've handled it decent. Until I have an issue, I'm probably going to just let them. I'm going to dilute with the hopping genetics, hoping we can get a little bit of our own composite up here. But,
just continuing on breeds, talking about your cattle, what kind of breeds are you working with there?
Yeah, so my mom's running South Pole bulls on her operation, just a solid red, low input animal. It really fit what she's done. My fellow August Horseman's kind of beating my head the Coriene thing, so I've got some Corienes.
I blame him for that too.
Yes, they fit my budget. That's the best part about Corienes.
Exactly, I agree, yes.
Then we're putting Obrick bulls on those Corienes for our grass-fed market, but yeah, now Obrick, I think it's AURBAC.
Oh,
it's
I know what
French
you mean.
Breed.
Yes, they're wild type coloration, and that they're that brownish with a darker front on them.
Yes, yep. I know when bulls mature, they really, with testosterone coming on, they darken up on the front. They look similar to a bison almost with a coloration pattern. The cows are just I don't have any cows. We've just got our first batch of calves out of an Obrick bull, hit the ground out of some Corienes we've got. We're hoping to keep back crossing and kind of grade up eventually to some Obricks, just something different. And I like weird stuff.
Oh, yeah. I struggle with that too. I'm just glad my wife struggles with it as well.
That helps, yes.
So on those bulls, were you able to get them locally, breeder nearby, or do you have to go quite a ways to get them?
So I've got I guess he's 6.5, 7 years old. I got hooked up with a gentleman that he was the breeder. I don't think he runs them anymore. I think it's Darren Unruh was his name. He seems to know everyone that's got them. He's been a really good resource. I started bouncing questions off of him after I'd reached out to a couple other people. And he had a bull out by Kansas City, so I was able to get that bull relatively close. And then I have a younger polled bull that I picked up from Minnesota, so I drove a little ways for him. The horn bull is pretty impressive specimen, I got to say. There's nothing wrong with the polled one, just the horn bull that Darren had bred is it. Yeah, if you look up, if you read any Johann Weitzman and the whole inherent fertility and sexual dimorphism, he really shows it. So I'm excited to have him on the farm. So. Hopefully he sticks around for a couple of years. I know he's getting a little older, but
very good. Yeah, hopefully he does. What made you go with that breed?
I just want a hardier animal that can perform on grass. I know it's like the Coriene thing, like so they're cheaper to get into, but I think having a little bit of that in the background can help on the handle heat. They can handle insects and other stressors. We've got a lot of Kentucky 31 fescue up in this area of the country, just like other people do. So we fight a lot of the issues that come along with fescue. The bulls, I think, complement those cows well. They come from a region of France that the genetics haven't really been tampered with, and they don't feed a lot of grain because it's a mountainous region.
Oh, yeah.
The one fear there was it's a cooler region, but they seem like they handle it well. It's southern France, I believe, so I shouldn't say it's completely cool. It's just a higher elevation. But last year in the drought, that was one of the worst fescue years. I saw a lot of conventional cattle struggling with fescue last year,
yeah.
and it seemed like these bulls from the Corriere just, I won't say it didn't affect them, but they handled it a lot better than some of the other stuff, like even some of my mom's conventional cattle. Yeah.
And that'll be interesting to see how this project goes for you and how they work out for you. I've seen pictures of the breed. I've read a little bit about them, but I've never been next to one. And to be honest, sometimes on those French cattle, and not to pick on the French too much, but sometimes those French cattle are a little crazy.
They can be. Yep. My grandpa on the Karr side brought in some Limousin back in the 80s, and I've heard a lot of stories and there's a reason we didn't run any continental cattle for a lot of years.
Yeah, that's true. Now, you mentioned last year that you had grass-fed some beef. Did you also grass-finish some lambs as well and direct market them?
Yeah, yep. Yes, yep. So we fed, I don't remember the number, but yeah, so we sold at Lake St. Louis Farmers Market, just testing out, see how that would be, and it went a lot better than I expected. I'm green on that end of it, and I got a lot of irons in the fire, so I'm fairly organized, but can always be improved. But yeah, we marketed eight to 12 lambs through there, in addition to some of the cattle we were selling, and I was pretty pleased with the reception of lamb. There's a lot of younger people my age that they didn't grow up in a house eating lamb, but they were trying it and they kept coming back. Especially they'd test out ground lamb, and then they would venture into some lamb chops or some leg steaks or something, and seemed to do pretty decent. Every time I had lamb, it didn't last very long. So a nice surprise.
And one thing you mentioned there, it sounds like you were selling it by the cut as well.
Yes, yeah. So we did a couple whole lambs, but for the majority it was by the cut down to Lake St. Louis. We sold quite a few whole beeves, half beeves. The lamb for the most part was by the cut, but yeah.
And you mentioned a lot of irons in the fire, so you're not doing that so much now. Do you plan on doing some later on?
Yep, and it is something we want to continue to do. We're actually working with Barn to Door to get an online website. I'd like to do drop sites, take some stuff down there. It's just a nice little side income to the farm. It's just fitting it into the schedule currently. Like I said, the row crop side, and we picked up some more pasture ground this year that we weren't really expecting. Been pretty fortunate. We've had some older neighbors retire, wanting to slow down, and just giving us some opportunities. So I want to make sure I do a good job on that. So I had to let something go, and being down there every Saturday, that I get a lot of work done on Saturday mornings, and when I'm sitting at the farmer's market, it doesn't happen always.
Yeah.
But it is something I want to get back into because I enjoy talking with people from the city. There's a disconnect from the rural areas to the city. The more we can tell our story and get on the same page with them, that's the best thing we can do as far as PR and ag. And I don't care if it's conventional or regenerative, but we've got to be our own voices in that spectrum. But yeah.
Yeah. No, just to continue on that, working in an education system for a number of years, I used to always tell them, if we're not out saying good things about ourselves, no one else is going to say them for us. We have to get out there and say those good things, form those connections, because a lot of times there's some negativity that comes, and negativity gets spread so much easier than the positive stuff. But we've got to be out there saying it. We've got to be meeting the public, building those relationships, and connecting them back to the farm.
Yeah, absolutely. Because like you said, no one's going to do it for us if we don't do it.
Right.
And there's so few farmers on the land anymore. We've got to rebuild those bridges. I know my in-laws are pretty involved in a lot of organizations, Farm Bureau and National Pork Producers and stuff. That's one thing they've done a really good job of. It's probably something I didn't appreciate as much as when I was a kid. You want a farm to hide from people, and that's one thing I'm trying to be better at, is telling our stories.
Oh, yeah. I think those stories are so important. Hence the podcast.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yep.
When you'd mentioned there's got a lot of row crop land, you've got some pasture. Have you worked on converting any of that row crop land into pastures, or are you keeping them pretty separate?
Yeah, when I was in high school, and my dad started this, I got to give him full credit. He always said he was a cattleman stuck in row crop country, and I've probably taken that vein. I'm trying to think of the acreage split, but the majority of our ground originally was crop ground. We're really fortunate. We've got 4 soil types on 550 acres, so we got some really uniform, nice farms.
Yeah.
And thankfully, like I said, the ancestors picked a pretty good area to settle in. But yeah, so we've been converting some since I was a kid. I'm trying to think of that split. We're somewhere around like 220 acres of that 550 that we own is in grass now. And before we were probably only somewhere around 160. So my dad started it back when I was in high school and college. And then I've done a couple conversions the last couple of years. Like 2021, we did another 24, 25 acres of cool season fescue, orchard grass, and some red clover, just some tame grasses. And the last year and a half, I've been working on doing some native restoration just because, for multiple reasons. Like that, I'm an eco nerd I'd like to have a little bit of what was here back in the day because those genetics are adapted to our climate. The drought last year, I watched my fescue shut off about April 15th to April 20th, and I had some Indian grass that naturally been creeping back in that was just plugging. And I'm not saying the yield wasn't reduced on the Indian grass, but I still had something to graze there when the fescue was just done.
Oh, yeah.
So that's an area we've been focusing a little more the last couple of years and plan on doing some more restorations there. But
actually, let's just go ahead and dive into that, Kody. For our overgrazing section, we're going to talk about native restoration. And since we're already here, let's just dive deeper into it.
Yeah. So like I said, that is something I've been interested in. I've got a friend from college. I always liked native grass and stuff. Yeah, just spent a lot of time reading about it when I was younger, and he's probably one of the sharpest people I know on that. So I always bounce ID questions off of him, and we're always trying to figure out how we can make our pastures more productive without just pumping more fertilizer and more inputs into it. I think a lot of that is getting some native grass, native plants back in there. So we started with 5.5 acres. I put some eastern gamer grass and ended up drilling it. I was going to try to put it through a corn planter. I started with that as my base. We've done some big blue stem. This last year I did 13.5 acres, and I was actually walking it last night with my cousin. I think it was 8 or 9 different species, but switchgrass, big blue, some pale purple coneflower, a gray-headed coneflower, just getting some forbs back into. Depending on the conditions, we're in this fun area of the country that we're flooding out right now. We were in a severe drought last year. We have really hard freezes, and then we'll have 80 degree days midwinter. So the more diversity I think we get out there in those pastures, the better. And like I said, those natives are they've been through it before. They've got 10,000 years of evolution in these areas. The Kentucky 31 fescue or orchard grass, they're not adapted to here. They're good quality forages and they've got their benefits, but the going forward, I'd eventually get to where we've got about 1/3 of our grass acres in perennial native grasses.
Oh, yeah. As you think about those native restoration, and you've also done some where you've converted some cropland into Kentucky 31 and orchard grass and other stuff, do you prepare the land in a different way, or is it basically the same process for both?
I'm trying to think. Both times we just drilled into existing crop residue. I play around with no-till quite a bit. Going back to the whole irons in the fire, it's just it's efficient to go across the ground and plant it. So we've got a no-till drill, and the county office has a no-till native seed drill. Going out, occasionally you can burn down with a herbicide, or you can graze really hard. I had an accidental experiment last year with the gamma grass that worked out really well at the co-op. We had a mix-up, and someone treated an entire box of wheat that didn't need to get treated, and they were trying to find a spot to get rid of it. So I said, I need a nurse crop for this native grass. So we drilled the wheat out dirt, 250, 300 pounds per acre, way too high, but we were just trying to burn it up. Then I went in and drilled the gamma grass into it, which in these native seedings it's really important to keep the weeds back, because if it swallows them out, rather than taking a 1-year establishment, you might push that to 2 to 3 years to actually have an effective stand out there. And in the grazing world, every dollar counts. So we really want to get those stands up to snuff as quick as possible. That wheat actually did a really good job. I grazed it 3 times with my ewe flock in the spring between March 15th and April 30th before the gamma grass had germinated. And then I got them off of it, and the wheat stunted out maybe about 12 inches tall, and it suppressed the weeds all the way to August. So I got a pretty decent stand of gamma grass underneath that, using it as a nurse crop. Like I said, it wasn't my original plan, but we just tweaked it. But I try to cut back on as much chemical as possible. It's a really good tool, but if I can get away without playing with chemical, I'd like to use nurse crops and some other crops to get these stands up. But
expand upon that just a little bit about a nurse crop.
Yeah.
What is it, and what's the goal there?
So a lot of times, like a nurse crop, you would take oats or wheat or something, and you would mix it in the grain drill at the same time that you're putting in whatever, whether it's a cool season introduced species or a cool or warm season native. You'd put it in at the same time. It's going to germinate sooner in the year, and it's going to just help smother weeds, keep those new seedlings from getting beat up, whether it's deer running through or hail or something. It's just it's like a nursery. You're taking care of some little baby plants, doing what you can to make sure they get the best start in life, because the better start you get, the better that stand is going to be, and the quicker it's going to come online for you. And once you get those plants up, as long as you graze them properly, you use rest, you don't just, natives are very sensitive to overgrazing. As long as you're mimicking the bison and moving them every so frequently, you can really abuse them for a short period of time if you give them the proper rest period on the back end. They're super resilient. But
so from the time you drill them in, you've got your nurse crop, and you mentioned just a while ago, you were able to graze your sheep through the wheat, I think you said 3 times before that gamma grass really got started. But once that grass starts coming up, how long before you do any grazing on that?
So once it starts coming, and that's part of the reason I was walking mine last night, I'm getting ready to bring sheep back to that farm, so I was seeing what has germinated. I don't want to hit any of these new seedlings. So as far as I'm concerned, like this new stand I've got in that gamma grass, I'm taking them to frost. I'm probably going to interseed some milo just for some stockpiled grazing. I don't know whether I'll get much of a stand. I think of some of my stuff is out there currently, but I'll add, on occasion, I'll add some other species, try not to hinder the new stand. I'll probably plant some 60-inch milo out there just to add some other winter stockpile feed. But at this point, I'm looking at that stand as just whatever it makes me for winter feed. I'll go in there after the first killing frost, and then I'll start grazing some stuff off on it. But it's offline for the rest of summer. So
I had suspected that was probably the case. And then graze it during dormant season. Will you plan to graze it next year, or you baby it a second year?
Yeah, I'll probably start grazing it next year. I'll be a little careful making sure, but some of these smaller, younger plants, I don't plan to push it overly hard the second year, but I will try to get at least 2 grazings off of it next year if we're getting adequate rain and I can get in and out of it pretty quick. But a lot of times, like if you take care of them the first year, they can go basic, not full production year 2, but they're pretty good chunk of the way there. So
and when you think about your native pasture versus fescue, how does that grazing differ?
So, like I said, historically, when I was moving every day, you're trying to leave, depending what style of grazing someone wants to do. I know there's a lot of different ways to graze stuff. There's some total grazing. I tried pushing the grazing on fescue with my sheep, and I had some health issues with the sheep. So I've backed off to where I'm leaving a little more residual than most people in that higher density grazing probably are. Just seemed like the sheep didn't handle it as well as cows do. But the natives, rather than leaving that 4 to 6 inches of residual, you're probably leaving somewhere closer to 8 to 12 inches. And like I said, if you've ever read anything on how bison used to graze, they could pummel it. And so you can go in and pummel those grasses, but that's a longer rest period on the back end. If you leave that 12 inches, you can probably crank out a couple grazings in summer because it's going to respond pretty quick. If you're looking, I'll probably misspeak here, but fescue, the majority of the roots are in the first 2 feet. Eastern gamma and Indian grass and big blue, some of those, you're talking 10 to 16 feet. And we've got a clay hard pan up here. I think that's one of the issues we faced in our row crop is we took grasses out of this area that had these deep roots that helped us get through those hard pans, and they're adapted to get through there. Our fescue is not really breaking that up as much up in this area. So
I've seen those images comparing native roots to these improved variety roots. It's just amazing how deep those native roots go.
Yeah, and it makes them so resilient. Whether burning, harsh grazing, or whatever's going on, there's a lot of reserve there for those plants that could get back in and go again. And I did that. I had a couple plugs of gamma grass. I've got a local ecotype. I've been digging and plugging around my farms to help spread those genetics around. I had a pretty good clump that I forgot where I did it at. I didn't mark it. And so I had one spot of fescue. I had a bunch of lambs in that paddock. So I left them there longer than I normally would have last year. And I realized afterwards, I'm like, oh, that's where that gamma grass was at. I pummeled it. The fescue stunted out because we got so dry. The gamma grass, even just a 1-year stand, it was an established plant that I'd plugged, but it immediately ramped up and took off. And it was pretty resilient where I thought I killed the thing. It did great.
You've talked a little bit about if you hammer it pretty hard, you got to give it enough rest time. Are you typically trying to give it on native grass twice as long as fescue to recover, or how is that rest period when you think about it?
I'd look to see. I'd look to watch the leaf tip make a point again. I think Greg
Yeah.
Gidio talks about that.
Yeah, he
That's my
does.
big
He
thing.
does.
I do follow that same principle as far as I don't want to put a time limit to it, because if I
Right.
graze it hard mid-June, it may be ready again in 2 weeks. So you just got to watch the grass, and if it's still showing, if it's growing slow, the leaf hasn't pointed back out like it's fully recovered, you might be a little bit early on that grazing, but I don't want to say 4 weeks or 5 weeks, because it just depends on the time of year, the rainfall you're getting. Later in the season, I would shut down. September 15th is the cutoff for us ahead of the killing froth, because you want to make sure you leave enough leaf that you're putting root reserves back in. So that's Northeast Missouri. That's our cutoff. You get animals out of warm season natives at that time to make sure that they got adequate fill for winter. And then after you have that killing frost, you can dump back in and basically take them back to wherever that stubble height is. The bunch grass stubble height starts at, even a little farther from that 12 inches I said earlier. But yeah.
Now, one thing we talk a lot about with fescue is stockpiling it.
Yep.
Do you do some stockpiling of fescue? Can you stockpile native grasses?
Yeah, so we do stockpile fescue, and that's part of the reason we're bringing the natives in. It gets us off of the fescue in a window that it's going to allow me to stockpile better than what I've been doing.
Yeah.
It's a big part of it. The cover crops play into our personal operation big in that early winter window, but the native, historically, people always say they lose quality as they mature out extremely quickly. One of my friends has done a little bit of testing showing that Gamma holds on to nutrients a lot longer than what people thought. He sent off some. There's no, I don't know if there's a whole lot of data on it outside of him sending off forward samples. So it was carrying quite a bit of nutrition into December. Originally, people wouldn't have thought they did. And I got to say, I noticed my sheep, when I dumped them in, that's one of the first things they did, is the sheep and the couple Corrientes that were out there with them, they went right to that Gamma patch and started taking it down, where we had some really burnt up stuff out of the drought last year. That they found the natives pretty quick.
Oh, yeah. I'm not really sure on the Gamma grass range. I know my dad had read something about it, and we've talked about trying to establish just a little bit, see what it does here. I think I'm a little west of where the normal range is, but to be honest, I'm not sure I could identify it if I walked out in the pasture. I'm just not familiar with it.
Yeah, once you see it, and it almost, I don't want to say it looks exactly like Johnson grass, because it doesn't, but it would have some similarities to Johnson grass, or if you're seeing shatter cane starting out young. It's in the corn family, Gamma grass is, so it's got a lot of similarities as far as leaf structure. It's obviously smaller, but I'd say your area, Oklahoma, there probably were some varieties down there, or some ecotypes that would have ranged there. I think, I don't want to misspeak on here, but I know there's a couple southern, Oklahoma, Texas, there's some ecotypes that come from that region. So, but yeah.
I know we've talked about it, and it's always been something I got to research. I got to look at Dale Strickler's book, see what it says.
Yeah, that's a good one.
And I haven't done it yet.
And that's one thing with the native establishment. I talked to Dale quite a bit before I did the Gamma grass, because I knew he was one of the big gurus on it. And he told me to inoculate the seed, and I can't think of the name of the stuff I used, but I got it through him. But I did inoculate the native seed, because they have obviously take the stuff out of crop ground. The microbial community isn't what prairie is, so that really is supposed to help that initial establishment period. And I think in his book, he's got a side-by-side in it of stuff that he inoculated and didn't inoculate on Gamma grass. And I will, for what I see from mine, I didn't leave a strip that I didn't inoculate. I just inoculated it all, but I'm pretty pleased compared to some other establishments I've seen in my area.
No, very good. Yeah. My dad will see something, or I'll see something, so we're always talking about something else we got to try. And sometimes I'm like, let's just put the brakes on it and just do what we're doing. But I know we've talked a lot about Gamma grass and seeing what it does here. Yeah. And most of our land here, my dad's place is all improved varieties. It's not any natives. Okay. Most of my leased land, there is natives on it, a lot of broom sedge, and a lot of just Johnson grass. So I graze a lot of that.
Okay. Yep. I don't have any Johnson grass, and I don't. It looks like it can pour on some tonnage, but I'm a little bit scared of the stuff. So I'm glad it's not something I had to face yet. But
it is. Right now, it's one of my favorite grasses. It gets late summer, that patch of Johnson grass, one place I have, like the north half of the property is Johnson grass mainly. And I can graze that as hard as I want and doing my rotations. And before I even realize it, I'm ready to go back there. It's amazing how much foliage it'll put up. put out there for you. Of course, you got to be very careful about grazing it. And for the most part, I've not had any trouble. And I say for the most part, I haven't had any trouble. But I grew up and my dad had trouble grazing ginseng grass and we lost some cows. That's always in the back of my mind because I'm too poor to lose cows.
I hear you, and they're really expensive to replace right now. So
They are, yes. Yeah. Kody, it is time for us to move on to our famous 4 questions, sponsored by Ken Cove Farm Fence. Ken Cove Farm Fence is a proud supporter of the Grazing Grass podcasts and grazers everywhere. At Ken Cove Farm Fence, they believe there is true value within the community of grazers and land stewards. The results that follow proper management and monitoring can change the very world around us. That's why Ken Cove is dedicated to providing an ever-expanding line of grazing products to make your chores easier and your land more abundant. Whether you're growing your own food on the homestead or grazing on thousands of acres, Ken Cove has everything you need to do it well. From reels to tumblewheels, polytwine to electric nets, water valves to water troughs, you'll find what you're looking for at Ken Cove. They carry brands like Speedrite, O'Brien's, Kiwi Tech, Strainrite, Job, and more. Ken Cove is proud to be part of your regenerative journey. Call them today or visit kencove.com and be sure to follow them on social media and subscribe to the Ken Cove YouTube channel at Ken Cove Farm Fence for helpful how-to videos and new product releases. They're the same 4 questions we ask of all of our guests. And our first question, what is your favorite grazing grass related book or resource?
yeah, I read a lot of old journals just about, so I don't know if it's a grazing grass resource necessarily, but I like to see what the ecological context of our area was pre-settlement. That's the template I think. It's never going to be like it was, but if I can mimic some of those systems, my grazing, some of the old Lewis and Clark journals, and there's some others from my area you can find, and then anything from Wendell-Berry. He's a big agrarian writer. I can't say it's necessarily grazing grass again, but he's all about community and bringing stuff back to the farm. So I really enjoy reading his stuff as well. But
I need to read his work because his work gets brought up, and I haven't read it, and it's really a lack on my part. I need to read some of that.
Yeah, I recommend it. Unsettling of America was written in the 70s, and he's called what's happened the last 50 years that book forecasts a lot of what happened in agriculture and rural areas. I'd recommend it.
Kody, our second question, what is your favorite tool for the farm?
Definitely a side-by-side. So again, I'm an efficient farmer, so I like getting places fast and without walking as much as possible. So I've done a lot of walking as a kid, and I really enjoy the gator that we got on the farm.
I'm about to transition. I do most of my setting up fences and stuff by walking. But I've got a knee that has decided that it wants to hurt once in a while. So I'm about to transition to a side-by-side or a 4-wheeler to put up fences.
Yep. I've been pretty stubborn for a lot of years, and after we finally got one, I'm not looking back.
Oh, yeah. I keep pricing them, and prices scare me.
Yeah.
I haven't jumped on anything, and of course, I'm always looking on Facebook Marketplace for a bargain.
Yes.
And my wife is usually quick to say, you know how to fix that? And sadly, my problem is I'm like, nope, but I think I can figure it out.
Yep. For save a couple $1,000s, you can do a lot of research on YouTube.
Exactly, yeah. Our next question, Kody, what would you tell someone just getting started?
Yeah, get involved with some local farmers that are doing it, or find someone, even if you have to drive an hour or two, bounce ideas off of guys that have been doing it, because if they can save you some headache, mistakes. I've had a lot of guys that have helped me keep from making mistakes, and I made a lot of mistakes that I've hopefully been able to help other people not make. Network-wise, I would just definitely network, and then don't be scared to jump in and try it. Small scale is still a great learning opportunity. Don't get yourself hung out, but just go out there and try it. You need more people on the land.
I think all that's great advice. Building that network, figuring out people in your area, go to conferences so you can find who they are, because went and listened to Alejandro Carrillo just a couple months ago, and I met someone I was going to say 2 miles. He's not. He would be 6 miles from me. But I'm like, I didn't even know you were there. Where you been hiding?
Yep. It's amazing what kind of people come out of you start doing something that's different with people that are a lot closer to you, have been doing it for quite a while, but you never knew it because they were either too scared to talk about it, or they were just in their own little area doing it.
Or out of the way where you don't go. Yeah.
Yeah.
So get out there and network. And then I love the advice of getting started. Nothing gets finished if you don't start.
Yep. So just get the ball rolling. That's the big one.
And lastly, Kody, where can others find out more about you?
Yeah, so I'm on most social media. I'm on TikTok and X now, I guess, instead of Twitter. I think it's Florida Grazer for my handle on both of those. Just I got cows and sheep. I thought that was a cute name or whatever. And then I'm on Facebook. It's just Kody Karr, and Instagram is Karr Family Farms. So I like to throw a bunch of pictures of the farm and my kid being ornery on the farm on there.
Oh, very good.
But yep, that's probably the easiest place to find me. And yep, if anyone's ever got any questions, I'm happy to tell them how I've messed stuff up before.
Wonderful, Kody. We'll put those links in our show notes. And we really appreciate you coming on and sharing with us today.
Yeah, thank you, Kyle, for having me. This has been pretty fun. Like I said, I've enjoyed listening for a while, so I appreciate you for reaching out and having me on.
Wonderful. I appreciate you listening, and I've enjoyed the conversation.
Thank you.
I really hope you enjoyed today's conversation. I know I did. Thank you for listening. And if you found something useful, please share it. Share it on your social media. Tell your friends. Get the word out about the podcast. Helps us grow. If you happen to be a grass farmer and you'd like to share about your journey, go to grazinggrass.com and click on Be Our Guest. Fill out the form and I'll be in touch. We appreciate your support by sharing our episodes and telling your friends about it. You can also support our show by buying our merch. We get a little bit back from that. Another way to support the show is by becoming a Grazing Grass Insider. Grazing Grass Insiders enjoy bonus content, monthly Zooms, and discounts. You can visit the website, grazinggrass.com, click on support, and they'll have the links there. Also, if you haven't left us a review, please do. It really helps us as people are searching for podcasts. And I was just checking them, and we do not have very many reviews for 2024. So if you haven't left us a review, please do. Until next time, keep on grazing grass.